Thanks so much for coming, guys. I really appreciate seeing you all here in person and having everyone online. I'm going to use the clicker for the first time and see if it works. Okay, this is me. Thank you for that intro, Allison. Really appreciate it. I am a startup and small business consultant, as Allison mentioned. I'm also a CMU Project Olympus entrepreneur in residence. If you have any questions after this, or you want to talk more specifically about how this applies to your startup ideas, I'd be more than happy to chat with you after the talk. Or if you want to email me at this email address, that's the best place to get a hold of me. So for today, we're talking about science and art in pricing and revenue. But when I'm referring to science in this, I'm obviously not talking about biology or chemistry. I'm using this extended metaphor as a way to talk about the tried and true best practices that you should know when it comes to revenue and when it comes to pricing. So there's sort of a whole discipline of pricing best practices, right? What is value pricing? What is cost plus pricing? But then the art comes in how you apply those different principles into what actually makes sense for your companies. So we're first going to introduce you to some of the revenue levers. That would be our science in understanding what are the levers that you can pull on your revenue plan. Then we're going to talk about the art of lever pulling and why you would choose to pull some and not others and how they connect to each other. Then we're going to go through the science of pricing and the art of pricing, and then finish out with some question and answer. So at some point, maybe you've already had this happen on your entrepreneurial journey, you're going to be faced with an unreachable goal. So maybe as we're coming towards the end of 2023, going into 2024, you are setting your revenue goals and you are just thinking, it does not make any sense, right? Maybe we don't have any revenue today, and even $1 million seems like a crazy reach. But what we're going to do with our lever exercise is try and define how you would reach those goals. We're going to break down the very scary singular number into all of its component parts and show you how pushing or reducing pressure on some of these could make that unreachable goal feel reachable. So every revenue plan has a few levers that you can pull on. And I work with all sorts of different companies from pre-seed to Series B. And what I found is that most of these levers are very comparable across the different companies. The way they apply to your industry and your customer is going to look different, but for the most part, these can be pretty transferable between the different types of companies. And there's two types of levers that we're going to talk about today. So on the revenue side, decreasing and increasing pressure on your revenue levers determines how much money you're going to make. And then on the cost side, increase and decrease determines how much money you will spend. So they have relation to each other, very importantly. We'll talk about that in the art section. But there are two different types, and they depending on what your goal of what you're trying to do, you want to focus on revenue or you want to focus on cost. And the levers that I like to focus on with the different companies are volume, value, time, rate, and retention on the revenue side, and capacity and efficiency on the cost side. So these are the real key takeaway here. These 7 levers are the science of what I think it's really important for all startups to learn as you're trying to put together these revenue plans. So looking at the first revenue lever of volume, this is how many customers are coming in the top of your marketing funnel. So what does the very, very top of your funnel look like? If you're pre-revenue, I would encourage you to look at your total addressable market or your ideal customer profile to try and estimate how many customers are coming in the top. If you've already launched, I recommend that you look at those very top metrics. So your ad clicks, your website sessions, your store visits, if you're an in-person store. Maybe they haven't yet become customers, but they're aware of your brand and they're coming in the top of that marketing funnel. And how big is that number? The second one is value. And we're going to talk more about this when we zoom in on pricing. But value is how much is each one of these customers worth to you? Normally, when we talk about value like this, we're talking about an average contract value or average customer value, which averages up all the amount that all of your customers are worth to you into a single number. Sometimes you'll see this done on segments. So maybe just the customers for product A or just customers for product B. There's 2 ways to look at this. I recommend if you are just getting started out, think about this on a more short-term basis. So, for example, I am a avid Starbucks customer, as I'm sure most of us in the room are. I go to Starbucks once, I pay $6 for my chai latte. My average contract value for Starbucks with that transaction would be $6. But if you average that over the month or over the year, it's considerably more. That would be Starbucks's lifetime value for me as a customer. Really, my lifetime value, I don't want to calculate in front of this many people. It's probably going to be a lot. But when you're getting started as a company, LTV is one of those that shows up a lot in curriculums. So a lot of early stage startups think they have to know LTV right when they get started. It's almost impossible to try and calculate this. So my recommendation is to focus on the shorter term when you're focusing on the lever to start. The third lever that we're going to talk about here is time. So how long does it take a prospect to get from entering the top of your funnel to exiting the bottom as a customer? This is really important because when you're setting your revenue goals, let's say you set your 2024 revenue goal, you actually need to make that money within 2024, which means that time plays a huge role in that. So if your prospect takes 90 days to go from entering the funnel to purchasing, and you don't start selling until January of 2024, the year goes from 12 months down to 9 months pretty quickly. So it's really important to understand how long this process takes so that you can understand when you need to add more capacity or increase efficiency in those different ways. Otherwise known as average sales cycle or deal duration, you'll see it written sometimes. Rate is the percentage of customers that enter the top of your funnel and make it to the bottom of the funnel. So this is basically how good are you at converting these prospects to becoming customers. And how good you are will improve over time, especially if you are an idea-based startup, pre-seed startup. You will get better with this over time. But it's important to understand where you are right now so that you know how much you have to push on the volume in order to get to the number of customers that you actually want to see. And this is usually expressed as a rate. So we've got the number of customers coming in at the top divided by the number of customers coming out the bottom, and that would be your rate or your win rate. This last revenue lever is a little bit more appropriate for recurring businesses like software as a service. But I really think it is for everything. Even in the Starbucks example, me returning to Starbucks is a big way that Starbucks continues to get money from me. So in this example, this is of the customers that you have, how many are going to be returning to you on the next billing cycle. And this is very important because you are going to spend much more money trying to acquire a customer for the first time than you are trying to bring that customer back. If you're losing customers out of the bottom of your funnel, you're spending much more money overall for the same amount of dollars coming out the bottom. So retention might be something that you really want to focus on as a company. You can either look at this by the number of dollars. So you can say I have 80% retention because I sold 100,000 and I retained 80, or you can say I have 80% retention because I sold 10 customers and I retained 8 customers. Just depends on your business. Next, on to our last 2 levers here, our cost levers. So these are capacity is our first one. This is how much time does your organization have? And if you were to ask me to rank the levers over one another, this is the most important one to keep in mind, because for every hour that your team spends doing something, it's an hour that they spend that they can't be doing something else. And none of these levers are going to change without focus. If you want to increase your value, you're going to have to put some initiatives behind that, and someone on your team is going to have to work towards increasing that value, which reduces your capacity to do the other things that you're doing. So it's really important to understand what your capacity looks like. Some very back of the envelope math. If you take the number of employees times the hours that you're expecting them to work within a quarter, this is your non-renewable time resource that you have here to be working on these different initiatives. And then finally, we have efficiency. So this is how much output per dollar can you expect from your team. So in this example, we have a $200,000 earned by the sales team, but we're spending $100,000 on the sales team between salaries and expenses, et cetera. That means that we've got a sales efficiency multiple of 2. So for every dollar that we give the sales team, we expect them to give us back $2. This can be improved through training, through reducing unnecessary processes, through a whole host of different initiatives, and a very important multiple for trying to reduce that bottom line. So before we move on from these levers, does anyone have any questions, either in the room or online, for what these levers mean and how they affect a revenue plan? All right. So what we talk about with the art then is how and when do you want to pull each one of these levers, right? Now you know that these are the things that are important to you and the different things at your disposal that can increase your revenue or decrease your cost. But what am I supposed to spend time on right now? And I can't spend time on everything. So to illustrate this, I'm going to go through 3 different examples to sort of show you how these levers connect together. But I would love in the Q&A section at the end, if you have any real life examples of how this is working for you, I'd love to talk through what those would look like as well. So these are the 7 levers that we've been talking about. I'm sure everyone has heard the "it takes money to make money." So that is typically talking about spending more money than you would like to otherwise to acquire more volume in the top of your funnel, with the idea that the more volume you have in the top of your funnel, the more customers are going to come down to the bottom of the funnel. So what we see here, our blue is our goodness, our red is our badness. So our volume is increasing when we spend money to make money, but our efficiency decreases because the amount of money that we're spending is sometimes exceeding the amount of money that we're making. So this could be a really good option for you if volume is your #1 goal. But if efficiency is a #1 goal, "it takes money to make money" is actually really bad advice for you. And you should think about maybe some other levers that you could pull on to increase the amount of revenue that you're making that aren't just volume. So potentially focusing on the rate of the customers that we already have. What if we won more of those customers? That wouldn't necessarily touch on your efficiency nearly as much. Or what if we changed our pricing and we made more money from each one of those customers? A couple of different paths to reach the same revenue goal.
From your experience, what types of companies tend to like the volume more than the efficiency?
The question is, what types of companies tend to like the volume more than the efficiency? I would say more CEOs that are more comfortable with risk. I think that is it can be a very risky strategy. The way that it gets less risky is that you know that if for every dollar that you put into your marketing, you are getting back a certain number, right? But there is inherent risk in this strategy. I tend to see the volume investment works really well when you have programmatic marketing spend. So things like Facebook ads, Google ads, that sort of thing. And that doesn't work for all businesses. So I tend to see this more with like B2C products, but that's more of just like in my experience, it's not a rule of thumb by any means. Okay. So next example here is the adding salespeople fallacy. And I call it a fallacy because in companies with sales teams, often what you'll see is the CEO says, "we have to triple sales next year." And then the head of sales says, "okay, I need 10 more salespeople." And you plug in 10 more salespeople into your beautiful revenue model, and it looks perfect because you're 10xing your current sales output that you have. Or, let's say you have one salesperson that you're 10xing that. But what they're not understanding is that by increasing the capacity, you will very likely take a hit on your rate, value, and time, because salespeople don't just come in the door and know exactly what they're doing. And they need to be onboarded. They need to build up their book of relationships, right? They need to do all of these different things in order to have the same rate, value, and time as your existing sales force. So adding salespeople doesn't always result in a perfect calculation of revenue because you have to account for these things. a lot of times I see companies put a lot of effort on mitigating this risk. So they say, we're going in with our eyes open, capacity up, rate value time down. So we are going to spend a lot of time on onboarding materials so that we can know that our salespeople are getting the best foot forward in their rate value time, and it gets us the shortest path to getting them back on track. But in order to know that you need to do that, you have to be aware of how these different levers play on each other. And then our last example here is pivoting to a higher paying customer. So let's say right now you have a average contract value of 5,000, and you have identified that there's a segment of customers within your customer group that actually has a willingness to pay of 10,000, and you want to shift all of your marketing strategies, all your sales towards this 10,000 segment. Typically, what that will result in is an increase in value because you can charge them more, but a decrease in volume because there are fewer people that reach that higher willingness to pay. It will also result in more time being spent because the higher the dollar figure, typically the longer the sales cycle is in order for the company to make a decision to purchase that product. So pivoting to a higher paying customer might be great only if your value of your fewer amount of customers and the extended period of time is more than what you're making today with your current lower paying customers. Yeah.
Actually, a general question. In the context of a hardware company, how do you see the balance between volume and value? Because I guess I would imagine that as to increase your volume, you have to double down on the current product and the current manufacturing and development time for that versus value would be working on the next product. So there's a lot of hardware companies that kind of balance that. I guess I'm wondering what your opinion is on that balance.
Yeah. So the question is what are these levers in the context of a hardware company, especially the volume and the value? So I would say for a hardware company, the volume is still the number of people coming in the top of your marketing funnel. So it's still the number of people that know about you as a company. And the value is how much you're pricing. So it's, let's say we have a computer and you would pay $1,300 for a MacBook, but you wouldn't pay $1 million for a MacBook. There might be someone who would pay $1 million for a MacBook, but that number of people that would is much fewer than the number of people that would pay the $1,300. And that holds even if we went to $2,500, right? So that's what this is saying is if you increase that value from the $1,300 to the $2,500, fewer people will be willing to purchase at that price. And the people that are will probably spend more time in that purchasing process. So what we're saying here is that the science, the understanding of the levers and the fundamentals of this idea, it quantifies, it says, here are the different things at your disposal. And then the art qualifies. It says, here's what will happen when you pull this lever, and here's why you would want to pull this when and how. So we're going to zoom in on value because we want to talk about pricing in this. And one of the big keys of value, how much are we making per customer, is how much are you charging them per customer? When we talk through the science of pricing, again, science here being the tried and true methods that you can go and learn in a textbook sort of foundation. I like to break this down into 3 different buckets. So we have our price point scientific methods, we have our price packaging, and we have our price positioning. So price point would be things like value pricing, cost plus pricing. If anyone uses Uber, you know about dynamic pricing, where supply and demand determine the pricing. If you have bought anything for $99, you know psychological pricing because it's basically 100, but it feels good. So those are all the price point methods that I recommend you research and really understand the pros and cons of each. Price packaging is what method are you using to pay this company? Is it a flat-based pricing? Is it subscription? Is it impact-based? Is it tier-based? Are you paying per user, paying per module? All of those different options, and there are pretty much infinite iterations of this are available to see on a couple of the resources that I'm going to show you. And then the price positioning methods is how is the price positioned to the company? These are a little bit harder to find from when you're researching them. But what I highly recommend is that you go to companies that you like and see how they do this. So this is at what point does the customer find out what the pricing is? What does the material look like that they are looking at when they learn what the pricing is? What are you having transparent communication? Does the pricing change over time? All of those sorts of things.
We have a hand.
Yeah. Jordan?
Yeah, hi Laura. My question's
Hi.
about if you were to look at it from a context of a consumer app that's their main source of revenue is ads, would you consider the advertisers as the consumer? And in that case, how would you view this? Or would you be considering the users in your pricing?
That is a great question, and actually one that I get a lot through Project Olympus. So when you have a company that has a different buyer than a user, whenever we're talking about pricing, we're always talking about the buyer. The user might be paying the buyer sometimes. In some cases, you're doing like a sell-through situation. But from your perspective, you are always thinking about pricing in the context of the buyer. And so for this example, that would be the advertisers who are paying for the ads.
All right, thank you.
So I really recommend looking at these two resources. First one is actually called The Science of Revenue, which is an excellent resource put out by a consulting company called Winning by Design. I use a lot of their visualizations because I think they do an excellent job of breaking down what different pricing methods have to do with each other. We're going to walk through the spectrum of pricing methods in just a second. So highly recommend that. And they have it formatted sort of in a class format, so you can walk through it at your own time. And I also recommend a company called Profitwell. Their consulting arm is called Price Intelligently. They have a really excellent blog and newsletter where they teach just the fundamentals of pricing. So everything that we've been talking about, like the dynamic pricing and why you would choose to do that and why not. They also have a lot of case studies of other companies that are using different pricing methods that you can go to their websites and check it out. So highly recommend both of those if you're learning about the science of pricing. And the art of pricing comes down to knowing your customer. So what we talked about with revenue is that the art is knowing how and when to pull the levers. The art in pricing is understanding what is actually going to make sense for your customer. People who buy laptops will not pay $1 million. Like that just comes down to knowing what a laptop customer looks like. There are many more subtle and nuanced segmentations that your customers will have. So understanding that by speaking to them, doing those consumer interviews is a super important part of this process. So I'm going to give you 3 examples, same as we did with the last. So this first example of the art of pricing is trying to understand when should your customer hear the price. So I've worked with companies that have done all 4 of these different options, and I'm sure there are a lot more. Some companies post their pricing on the website, some don't. Some deliver it on a first call. So it's not on your website, but customer reaches out. You do your discovery call, you're communicating the pricing on that call. Some follow up on that call with materials that have the pricing. This is typically for like custom proposals where they need to know more about the customer in order to know what the pricing should be. And then some like to keep pricing back from the customer until they're able to deliver that information in the context of the value of their product. So there are rules of thumb for each one of these. I would highly suggest if your product is more than $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year, that you don't put it on the website. If it's more than $40,000 a year, you should wait until you can pitch it in the context of the value, is my personal opinion. But really the best way to understand the right one for you is going to be to know your customer and what makes the most sense for them. Yeah.
Could you repeat what was the cutoff for the website that you were using?
My rule of thumb, this is just my rule of thumb is 12,000 a year. And I will say that changes drastically based on industry and your competitive situation, but my typical, especially for SaaS, is 12,000 a year. So this is that great slide from Science of Revenue that I talked about before that talks about the pricing methods. And I put it up here to show, because I think this slide does a great job of, it's doing a lot, but it's showing the spectrum of pricing methods from paying upfront and having a perpetual license all the way on this side to having an impact-based license. So if we look over on the left, and this is, think 1980s software in a box sort of situation. You're purchasing the software, you're paying upfront, you're getting a perpetual license. This takes you through the spectrum of your multi-year licenses, your annual SaaS, your quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, hourly, down to a usage-based. So think like Venmo, where you're paying only when you remove money from Venmo, down to an impact-based, which says, I'm only going to pay you if I'm actually feeling the impact of what you're doing. So similar to how you pay a financial advisor a percentage of the money that they're making you. When you do an impact version, you as the company hold all the risk because you actually have to do the thing that you said you're going to do. Bad financial advisors make less money because they do worse on that. And if you are on the upfront side, the customer owns all the risk because if they bought software in a box and that software does not work for them, that's tough cookies because they already purchased the software and there's nothing that they can do about that then.
What's an example of an impact company that does they use their model in that way?
Question is, what's an example of an impact company that uses their model in that way? I will say, if you look at the years here, you can see like 1980s through the 2000s, then we come down here to the 2010s, and then you can see this bump back in the 2020s into SaaS. That's because a lot of impact companies that were around in the 2010s went out of business because the company owns all the risk. So there's a couple, there's one that I like in the construction sector called Procore that does a percentage of the money that they save you on your subcontracting contracts is how they price. And they've been very successful at that because they're a very good product, but you have to be a very good product to price this way. SaaS is a lot less scary. And I think a reason why you've seen this trend back in the 2020s. So again, which model works best for you? What amount of risk that you're willing to take, what your customer is willing to pay? All of these things require understanding your customer. How do they define ROI for them? How do they see value? How are they actually like able to pay? Maybe some companies can't pay subscriptions because they have to get things approved only once a year, right? So maybe a multi-year or maybe a perpetual license works better for that market. So you're going to figure those things out by doing those consumer interviews and really understanding your customer. Oh, yes.
So because the customer has practically no risk when it's on usage or on impact, basically, does that mean that your price point can be higher and the customer might be willing to pay more because, yeah, if you're making a difference, okay, you get money, otherwise you don't.
Yeah.
So can your margins be greater in that context versus say something like a pay upfront one where you like on-premise hardware, so everyone wants a discount for that.
Yeah.
So
It could be, right? Like if you, let's say you have a financial advisor in that context that makes you $500,000. And then they're taking 10% of that. That's really high, but just for mental math, they're taking 10% of that, right? If they were to have charged you that upfront, that would be a crazy thing to pay for a financial advisor upfront. You'd never pay that. But you can charge that on impact. So I think yes, but it still depends on whether that price matches how your customer values the product. You still can't charge $1 million for a MacBook, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and then this last one is a good example, I think, of breaking the rules. So we all know, I think we should all know what loss leaders are. They are when you're charging less for a product that it costs you to make as a way to capture your market. So in this situation, we have a goal. We want to capture as much of the audience as possible and make them customers. We have 3 products as a company. each product costs us about the same to make, but we've done our consumer interviews. So we know that the product A is purchased by the early market, and they have a product A is a perceived low value. It's very competitive, something that it's maybe a commodity product, right? Product B is bought by the middle market, medium value perceived. Product C, high market, with a high willingness to pay a higher price. So what I would suggest with this is making product A your loss leader. And you can charge less than the market. So $25, you're losing $25 per customer that comes in. But you know that that's okay, because this increases your volume so much. And you know that you've got your conversion rates to product B and product C. And that is it's basically gonna pay for itself, because you're allowing most of the market into your product. A lot of freemium does this. So freemium is never, 0% of the time, is freemium free for the company to deliver to you. It costs a lot to create a freemium product and to put in the marketing that you need and all the different to market the freemium product. It's not free to deliver it, but it's free to the customer. And what's great about that is you get customers in the door, they start to see the value of the product, and then you convert those customers up. The amount of money that you invested in the freemium product just goes in basically into your marketing for your later products. Does that make sense to everybody? So this is an example, I think, of the art of pricing, because we've learned the science. We understand margins and cost plus pricing and value pricing and all of those different pieces, but we're actually breaking the rules a little bit with the art. Loss leader is a non-intuitive solution to that problem. So we're challenging it with the art because we already understand the science. So some key takeaways that I want folks to take away from this presentation is that the science, really going back and understanding the fundamentals of these pieces, so the levers and the pricing methods, they quantify what you can do, while the art of how and when you deploy each one of those pieces and how you understand your customer, they qualify what your actual initiatives are going to be. So there are 7 key levers. They're value, volume, time, rate, and retention. On the revenue side, cost has capacity and efficiency. And then within pricing, we have 3 components of pricing: the price point, price packaging, and price positioning. And then the art comes in understanding that customer and really doing those consumer interviews. They're very important in this process. So what questions, or maybe what ways can we apply these to the companies that you are currently working on?
This is a little specific, I wasn't sure but for the freemium model.
Yeah.
The end user isn't one to pay, so you're gonna be having, like, let's say you run ads or something like that. How do you, I guess, how do you determine what advertisers would be willing to pay through a customer interview? Feel like if we if people use this app, how much do you pay to have your brand put out there? Or
Yeah. So in the situation where you are selling ads, your advertisers become your customers. So those consumer interviews need to be done with the advertisers to understand what they would pay. You do really need to understand what your market looks like, because that's basically what you're selling to the advertisers. Because, you know, you're, can't think of a good example right now. Your Gen Z products don't want to, target boomers, right? Like they want to target Gen Z. So you need to understand who is on your website to know what advertisers are going to be good for you. But I would challenge and say that you can run a very successful freemium model without ads. And the way that you do that is that you build a freemium model, understanding the economics of that investment, and that the conversion rate onto your next product is going to be high enough to satisfy the amount of money that you outlaid to build that freemium product. So I actually wouldn't recommend, not as a blanket statement, but generally I would say you can run a freemium product without ads and be very successful as long as the conversion rates are in there, which is why a lot of the times companies focus on the free product, but you should be putting as much focus on the marketing to convert as you are on the product itself.
My question is, what would be a nice way to get to those like willingness to pay? So we like spread out like flyers with QR code on the section there, and then the answer like we get based on like how much are you willing to pay? This is our service, and then like the long-term 10% to 5%, they can differ up to like 10 times. So we're like pretty confused about like how people are exactly willing to pay, and we're worried like since we're only doing like service in kind of Melbourne University, does this like generalize well to all the universities in the United States, or does it generalize well to like K-12, like these institutions as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question is, how do you determine willingness to pay without bias, hopefully? And then how do you, how do you understand how to apply that to your company? So I love this question. I think on a survey, not a conversation, it can be quite difficult, because if you ask anyone what their willingness to pay is for anything, the best price for the consumer is $0. So they're going to start at 0, and then they're going to work their way to your price. So they'll probably end up lowballing you for whatever it is that they would actually pay for the product if you put it up for that amount. So in an interview style, in a conversation, what I like to do is try and work back all the different questions that are nestled inside, what would you pay for this? Because what would you pay for this is often, what is your budget? Would you look stupid if you brought this to your boss, right? Or would you look stupid if your friends saw you using this product? So all of those things are in the willingness to pay question, and you want to break it all down. How do you know that you've spent a good amount of money on this? Give me an example of something that you spent too much money on in this category. Why do you think you spent too much money on it? Give me an example of a good deal, and sort of triangulate your pricing within that. I think once you've dug down a little bit, you can ask willingness to pay. It's just like that. What would you be willing to pay? But it takes a little bit, I think, to get to the heart of it, because consumers like to pay 0. Yeah.
Just following up that question, so I'm suggesting like if we get a willingness to pay figure from a survey, this tends to be on the low side rather than high side.
That's my experience. The question is, when you get willingness to pay from a survey, should you assume that it's on the lower side? I think you should assume that, just because that's typically human behavior, what they do on the surveys. It's not to say that it's not, it's not a good place to start. And I think doing the survey is a great place to start in getting consumer information, but I do think you should assume a little bit lower than what it actually would be. I mean, good example is, would I say on a survey that I would pay $6 for a chai latte? I would not. I would say I would pay $3 for a chai latte, right? But when I'm in line at Starbucks, I'm going to pay $6 because I need my chai latte, Yeah. Oh, thank you. Jordan?
Yeah, I want to ask about the advertisers again, but would you follow an impact-based revenue model for them, based on use, or are there other different methods of getting advertisers to pay? And also for the freemium model, are there ways to determine how to price your premium model to effectively convert the potential customers?
Yeah. So let's take them one at a time. So on the advertisers, could you charge them impact pricing? For when you buy ads, and when your advertisers buy ads, there's a very consistent format for purchasing ads, which is usually cost per number of impressions or cost per clicks. Is that impact? Maybe. I wouldn't necessarily go all the way to real impact, which would be, a percentage of the sales that they make from the ads that are clicked from your site, because that is lowballing your value to them. I think just getting the clicks and the visitors to their website is probably value enough for purchasing those ads. But I guess you could look at cost per impressions and cost per click as closer to the impact side of the spectrum, for sure. Does that part make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
And then how do you price your premium offering to make sure that it pays for your freemium offering? Is that the question?
Yeah, and how do you
Yeah.
make it attractive, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So we all use tools that are free because they're great, and free is the right price for most consumers, most things. But we should all be very familiar then with paywalls. So you can use usage paywalls or user paywalls. Netflix is a great example of this, right? They've got paywalls now that they are enforcing, where you can only have so many family members on your account or be in so many locations at once. Those are great examples of ways that they want to push you to be paying more. If you have a SaaS offering and you have a freemium model, you want to really instill those paywalls into it so that the customer has a reason to convert to the next level and to the next level. One of the other great things about the freemium product is it's not like you're building the freemium product all the time. You're outlaying that kind of as a fixed cost investment. So at the beginning, and then you just need to be able to pay that back with enough conversions to your other products. So it's typical that it's fewer customers that you need to actually convert to hit that ROI on the freemium than you would think, because it's not like you're rebuilding that all the time. But you do want to make sure your premium pricing is higher. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent.
So on the topic of the ads that you said, the freemium product would work without ads as well. So if you look at YouTube, not YouTube Premium, that has ads. Spotify has ads.
True.
So isn't that a behavior, like, isn't that trying to reinforce like a negative behavior of sorts that, okay, the fact that you do have, like they have a try premium thing. So the fact that you don't see ads is a positive reinforcement, but if you see an ad, that's a negative reinforcement. So couldn't that motivate the user or the buyer rather to actually take the premium subscription?
It's a great point. Yep, absolutely. If you hear Spotify ads in the middle of your songs, that's a great reason to go to Spotify Premium. It's a negative reinforcement instead of a positive reinforcement. It's a great example.
But well, you know what happens is then after, like I believe there's a certain time span until it's bothersome. After that, it's like, yeah, okay, I'm just listening to all that, but I'm, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
So
some people will stay forever. Yeah, some people will stay on freemium forever. Yeah. And so, if you have freemium, that can be okay. There are two different things here. There's freemium, which is like your forever home is free, and there's free trial, where it is you have 14 days and then you convert or you get out. Like those are your options. So for ones like YouTube, where they are monetizing their freemium, it's not in their best interest to ever kick you out, right? So they're going to keep you on freemium forever. But if you have a SaaS platform where you're paying for usage, or let's say you have any sort of cost of goods sold associated with delivering your freemium product, you might want to make that a free trial. And so they can see the value for free, but then they've got to convert or they've got to get out at the end. Yeah.
I had another question about the finding the appropriate price via surveys. So what you said is that, okay, you wouldn't say on a survey that you pay $6 for chai tea latte. But isn't that very subjective? So for an example, if it's a cold windy day, and you're in you wake up and you haven't slept well, so you definitely want it and you would probably pay $10 for it. But on some other days you wouldn't. So how can you incorporate that qualitative factor in the survey for a more accurate price value that the customers are willing to pay?
So you could say on the survey, imagine that it's a cold day and you woke up late and you've got to give this talk at CMU and you're late and you need your chai tea latte. You could say that on the survey, but because those are very specific criteria, right? That maybe your business, you want to go 365 days a year, right? You want to go on the hot days and the cold days. So actually it's better for you to sample as many people as possible and to take an average of those prices to get to what the answer is. Because for some people, they'll be in that situation when they take the survey. They'll say, I would pay anything for a chai tea latte. And some people will not. Yeah. So I think taking an average, but what you should understand about how just human behavior in surveys is when you take that average, there will very likely be more people who have lowballed you than have said that they would pay more.
In such a case, so as you said that you wouldn't pay $6 for a chai tea latte, and I'm
But
just
I do.
referencing that
I
example
do.
again and again.
Yeah.
Then how does Starbucks come to the $6 price point if it surveys you and finds, okay, there's just $3 that people are willing to pay them?
It's a good question. I mean, Starbucks, as an example, is one that changes their prices, right? So lots of Starbucks prices went up during the pandemic. Did Starbucks see a massive drop in volume as we would expect from the levers? Probably not, right? Because their prices have remained as high as they are. There's also a high cost of goods sold in that market, right? So maybe their costs have gone up and they've got to maintain these margins. So it's not just the customer side of it. But I think, pricing is one of those things that you don't want to change a lot. You don't want to pull the rug out from your customers, and you're going to have legacy customers, right? Whenever you change your pricing and have to decide what to do with those customers. So you want to change it as little as possible. But for consumer goods or hardware, you may be able to change it a little bit more because you're going, a cup of coffee is not the same as your annual subscription to Netflix, right?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I just want to ask a similar question. You've been asking about finding the value, at the beginning of startup, finding that funnel, so finding your audience. Because I kind of had a similar issue where I sent out surveys and, ask people, have you had this problem, or would you use this product and things like that. And it's difficult to say, whether or not you can actually trust those results and get an accurate number for what the audience will be. And then after you've done that, how do you actually build that funnel when you're starting from nothing, right?
Yeah.
You don't even know who you are.
Right.
and
Yeah.
Build that.
Yeah. So I think surveys are an excellent place to start. I would always look to supplement surveys with in-person, face-to-face interviews with people that you can go a little bit deeper, and you can bring up some of the contradictions that come up in the survey as not leading questions, but asking them how they think about those things and try and get a little bit deeper. It can just add a little bit of color to what you have. When it comes to building your funnel, what I recommend is figuring out first your customer segment, which is part of going and doing those customer interviews, is who of the interviews are resonating really well with your product, who's not. So let's focus in on the people that are, and then let's think about where those people hang out in person and online. And then we're going to try and go reach as many of those people as possible, as cheaply as possible. And that's how you start to build that funnel. And the very top is just people that know your name and kind of what you do, but they have not yet purchased. And then the exercise becomes, how do you educate those people, build the pain of not having your product, and start to pull them down that funnel. But those would be the steps. I think survey, in-person interview or face-to-face interviews, figuring out where your customer segment hangs out online and in person, and then building your go-to-market plan to try and capture their attention in both of those places. Any other questions? In the room or online? No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for sitting through this chat today. I really appreciate your time and attention. If you want to reach out to me for more specific feedback or just other questions, my email is lauraforthconsulting@gmail.com. I'd be happy to talk to any of you.